Welcome to Bridging the Gap. This is a show where I, your host Sheila, meet people of a younger generation to learn from them, to understand them, and to really see what they're doing with their lives. Today, I have the immense pleasure of introducing you to someone I admire, especially as a dancer. I'd like you all to meet Prachi Hota, a person who has brought her love for creation to the forefront and made it into a career. Welcome to Bridging the Gap, Prachi. This is a show where I meet young people like yourself and use this opportunity to figure out what makes you tick, what inspires you, or what has brought you to the place that you are at. And I want to learn from it all. And perhaps in the process, other people will gain out of it. So I want to introduce you all to Prachi, who is an amazing Odissi dancer, a filmmaker, somebody who loves geopolitics, and a lot more. But why am I saying all this? Let Prachi say it for herself. Prachi, tell me about you.
Thank you for having me. Like you said, dancer, filmmaker, interested in geopolitics, interested in a lot actually, pretty much anything that I feel will make me a better storyteller. But I think my journey as a storyteller really started at the age of 3 when I formally started training in dance. Did that, started in Kolkata under Guru Arpita Venkatesh, who is a wonderful young Odissi dancer herself. And then moved to Delhi, where I had the privilege of learning from Guru Sri Hari Krishna Beheraji, who is the person to have established Odissi in Delhi and other parts of northern India. And then after his demise, I've now started learning from Guru Ayasha Kumari ji. Nearly 2.5 decades now that I've been dancing, pretty much all my life. And I think allied with that, or sort of an extension of that, has been my journey as a filmmaker. I fell in love with filmmaking as a child. I can't tell you when, unfortunately, because that has not been as clear as the beginning of my training as a dancer. But I think I must have been 10 or 11 when I felt like I wanted to be a filmmaker. It just came from a conversation I was having with my parents because I used to love watching films. And I think my parents said, oh, we feel like she's going to make them someday. And up until then, I'd never even thought of filmmaking as a profession. I don't know who I thought made films or how they got made. But I've stuck at it since then. And that's been something that I've done for a long time now as well.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And the interest in geopolitics just comes from the home I grew up in, because I grew up with parents who would often discuss geopolitics, current affairs, literature, music. So a lot of the time when the three of us have time to sit together, we often read articles out to each other or discuss art, music, current affairs. So that's something that's always interested me. I like keeping abreast of what's happening in the world.
Wow, that's a lot of multifaceted you there.
I just like to do pretty much anything that I think will make me a better storyteller. And I think what's happening in the world, geopolitics, geoeconomics, really informs everything.
You know, I have seen you dance and you're very good at it. But I'm intrigued. In a world where everybody is learning more Western dance forms, I know you started at 3, you did mention that. What made you stick with it?
It's like Toni Morrison, she's written a wonderful book novel named Beloved.
Mm-hmm.
And in the preface to it, she talks about how language often falls short of expressing things that are most important to us. I think my relationship with Odissi is a lot like that. I don't think language a satisfactory tool to express why I stuck with it. But I think it's just because it centers me emotionally, keeps me fit, and centers me in that way as well. But I've just never felt the need to do anything else. So it's never been even a question. It's just been a part of my life. I've really never questioned why I want to do this.
Never felt like saying, oh my God, why am I spending so many hours doing this? I want to quit and do something else, ever? Maybe not doing something else, but did you ever feel like quitting dance because it takes so much out of you?
Yeah, I think I'd be lying if I say that I was never demotivated.
Okay.
Of course, one gets demotivated, especially when other aspects of your life are sort of taking over your time, because time is finite, right? You only have 24 hours in a day. And when you want to do everything, like as a student, I was obviously balancing academics with dance. Now that I've moved on to filmmaking, I'm now balancing filmmaking and dance. And there are days when it feels like there's too much to do and not enough time to do it in. I might have felt demotivated at times, but I think I'm also lucky because I can always call my parents up and they'll usually have a solution to it. So yeah, I think what's kept me going is a very, very strong support network.
I've been listening to you talk and I realized that you're right, time is very finite and dance is really a discipline. So how does that plan out, or how does that actually play out in your day-to-day life? How does that work? Do you get up in the morning? How does dance fit in? Because it requires so much of effort.
It does require effort, and you do have to be very disciplined to be a dancer. But I think for me, it fits in seamlessly, actually, because I've been doing it for so long, but also because I really grew up immersed in the tradition. Dance to me is as natural as brushing my teeth. It's something that you've got to do. It's almost like you brush your teeth to maintain personal hygiene. I have to dance to maintain emotional hygiene, almost. So yeah, I do begin my day with a good few hours of dance.
Okay.
I get that in before I go to work because I work now.
Yes.
And I also do that as a matter of discipline, but I've realized that when I'm not practicing every day, when I'm not regularly immersed in my craft, it affects me emotionally, right? It affects my mental health. So it's something that I need to be able to do. So it's not really even a question of how do I do it? Do I even do it? Like I said, it comes to me as naturally as brushing and bathing does.
As you were growing up, did you ever experience FOMO, saying, oh my God, my friends are all going out to do something and I can't do it because I have to work at my dance? Did that happen?
I was the very weird, nerdy kid who liked to, who was either studying or just reading a book in the class. So I'm still a nerd. I've always been a nerd. So actually, no, and also I think my childhood was so full. There was always something to do, and I could see that I was leading a very productive, happy childhood really because of it. So I never really felt like I needed to go out for a party that my friends were going to. Never really. But I think I was perhaps an odd sort of a kid that way, that I was really just enjoying how full my childhood was without feeling the FOMO.
You did say something very interesting. You said that it's all about storytelling, right? So you were saying that dance and movies, films come together and it just makes you a better storyteller. Tell us a little bit about how you made this decision to go into films as a career and not dance as a career.
I think I see both films and dance as my professions.
Oh, you see it both as But is it a career that you would professionally? Yes, you're qualified in both. You mentioned your family and how you used to sit together and read stuff to each other, talk about art, geopolitics. Tell me more about the family.
So I come from a family of we're a very close-knit family. At home, mostly it's just mom, dad, and I. But we're people who any sort of free time we get is spent sitting together, talking to each other. There's nothing that I don't talk about with my parents, and they share pretty much everything with me. We're very, very open. The channels of communication are very open. We're really always talking to each other. And I think the one thing I inherit from them is the habit of reading. They read a lot.
Okay.
and we have a library full of books. That's something that we take a lot of pride in. So we read, we'll sort of suggest books to each other, we'll find articles. Even now, if you look at like the family WhatsApp group, a lot of it just consists of interesting podcasts, article links, just that kind of stuff. And the next time we chat, and we talk to each other every day. Our chai time still happens together.
Okay. Morning chai time?
Yeah, still happens together. And we still spend that time sort of saying, oh, I sent that article. Did you get a chance to read it? I sent that podcast. Were you able to listen to it? So a lot of it is conversations like that. So that's something that I've always been interested in. Policy is another thing that I've taken an interest in, that which is an extension of geopolitics. Because having performed now in India and across the globe, I've seen the kind of impact that cultural policy can have in the way that countries interact with each other. And I think cultural policy is sort of something that, as an artist, interests me quite a lot. So that's sort of really my into geopolitics now.
Interesting. Interesting. Let me step back a bit and ask you this question about dance and the money you earn from dance. It's a known fact that it's not the highest paying profession in the world. How do you balance out the need to earn money and be independent with following your passion?
So you're right, dance will not make you a rich, wealthy person. But I think in today's time and day, with the kind of work that young dancers have also put in, and dancers who are slightly older than me have also put in into trying to make dance a financially sustainable career option, so things have gotten better. And I think it's however an effort that needs to be continued, because we're, as a generation of dancers, we're still working to make dance even more sustainable financially for young artists. So that's a conversation that's happening in the fraternity. It's a conversation that young dancers are having with our seniors,
Okay.
just so that artists can sustain themselves and have enough to be able to practice their art with a certain amount of financial security, because you need that. You can't produce good art unless there is a certain amount of financial security. And I think we're beginning to get to a point where that is becoming the case for more and more dancers now. But again, I mean, I'm lucky enough to also be qualified as a filmmaker, so I have another source of earning.
True, but not every dancer may do that.
Yes, a lot of dancers do still choose to have another career.
Oh, they do?
They do.
Okay.
And the ones who teach actually do make a decent amount of money through teaching. So there's always ways to make money. It's not like you're going to go hungry if you're dancing. Even if dance is the only career you have in your life, there are ways to make money. It will not make you wealthy, but it will make you financially independent.
It may not make you wealthy, but it'll give you a rich, full life. Yeah? Would you agree?
Will. Absolutely, yeah.
How come you don't teach? I know you don't teach. How come you don't teach?
Because teaching is a big responsibility. It's a huge responsibility.
Okay.
And, I enjoy teaching. The few times that I have had the opportunity to teach, I love it. But not just dance. I think I would probably have enjoyed being an educator.
Okay.
And I still might. I mean, never say never, right? One might still end up in education somehow. I think I chose not to teach full time primarily because it's a huge responsibility. I mean, you're taking charge of a young person's education, be it in dance or otherwise. You're still taking charge of a young person's education. You get to shape them in some way or the other. And I've seen the influence that teachers can have in a young person's life, both positive and not so positive. And I think I just don't think I have given myself the permission to take that responsibility on yet. Maybe I will, but either way, I am not teaching full-time yet because it's not something I take lightly. I recognize how large that responsibility is, and I don't ever want to take it lightly. So when I do start teaching, It'll be when I'm certain that I have the strength and the resilience it takes to become an educator, because it does take a lot of strength and resilience.
Certainly, it does. I think also, and I've heard other dancers mention this, that when you teach, you actually stop focusing a lot on yourself and your style and your learning, and you're focusing on your students. So your own expertise could take a beating. Is that true?
I'm not sure how true that is, primarily because when you teach, you're also getting back in touch with the basics yourself, right? I've often realized the few times that I have taught someone that there may have been flaws in how I understood the basics, which get rectified in the process of teaching somebody else. So perhaps one might feel that way as students get older, but I do feel like teaching can sometimes, it depends on how you choose to practice even the craft of teaching. You can either use it to re-educate and refine your own craft, or it can be something that takes over your own expertise, or subsumes your expertise, which then gets neglected in the process of just. So it really depends on the educator themselves.
Interesting. So there you were dancing, and you decide to do filmmaking, and that takes you to London. And I know in our conversations you've told me that it was a city that pretty much shaped you. So tell me about your London experience.
I fell in love with London. So I moved to London after I did my bachelor's. So I moved to London for my master's. I'd of course been there before. So my first short course in filmmaking really had happened in London as well. And then I moved there a few years later. I studied filmmaking. It was a full 2 to 3 years master's course. I had a great time there. I learned so much about the craft. I gained a perspective that I never had before. Really taught me who I am as a storyteller, even beyond just making films. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me that I can take care of myself. And it taught me that I can be independent, that I can push myself, that I can push the envelope in terms of the crafts that I practice. And I think the most important thing it taught me was that I have enough space in my life for both dance and filmmaking.
That's interesting. So with those two, you must be having very little time for something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's enough and more to, I think, by way of work, there's enough and more between dance and filmmaking to keep me satisfied and satiated.
You know, it's interesting. While I'm hearing you speak, I'm actually thinking of some of the challenges that a lot of young women face. And one of the challenges they face is they're managing family, they're managing kids, they're managing work. And I think it's really about choices, right? Once you make your choices, you just make them work. And it's very interesting to hear you say that between these two, I'm full. I think the challenge really happens when, as young people or even older people, you want it all. You want this also, you want that also, you want to excel at something, but you also want family time. You want family time and you want to excel at something, but you also want your me time. So I'm really, what I'm taking out from what you're saying is that it's about making those choices that really resonate with you and staying true to those choices. That's what I'm taking away.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of people wanting everything, I think I want everything as well.
Okay.
I have never been growing up also, there were moments when people would, whether directly or indirectly, say, well, you've got to choose between academics and dance now. And often my response to that would be, but why? And then when I started making films, people would naturally assume that I've given up dance. You know, oftentimes I would talk to my cohort at film school, and they would say, why did you shift to filmmaking then? And I would say, I haven't shifted.
I've just added.
I'm still dancing.
Yeah.
This is just another thing that I'm doing. So I've always been, and I remember watching a show, I can't remember the name, unfortunately, but where somebody said you're an all of the above kind of person. I am an all of the above kind of person. I think the key to that is being flexible. I think.
Tell me more.
So I think what I have learned is being kind to myself, in the sense that if I can't fit everything in a day, at the end of the day, I'm okay saying I grew as a person, I did something new, I learned something new. It's okay if I missed out on a little task here and there, and that's fine. So it's almost like I'm not very rigid about I want to do this at this time of the day for these many hours. Contrary to what a lot of people might say, I don't make timetables or I don't make to-do lists. I know what I want to get done. I usually have sort of like a mental list, but I am pretty flexible about how I go about my day, which also requires quite a lot of discipline, because you know what is essential in the day, right? Like, I know that dance for me is essential, so I will get that done. But if, say, I want to, while I'm practicing, I feel like I want to focus on something for longer than I would have planned for longer than I normally would. Like, I just want to focus on one little movement or one little expression and get that right. I'm okay being flexible with, that's just what I'm going to do today.
Wow.
For as long as I'm dancing, I'm going to spend time with that one little movement. And that's okay, because I've learned something new.
I think it's amazing, what you're saying, because you're so right. It's really about being kind to yourself and about being flexible. And frankly, Prachi, for me, there's a learning there, because I'm a calendar-driven person. I'm a schedule-driven person. I'm an Excel sheet-driven person. And even at this age, when you're supposed to be wiser, I think there are times where you end up saying, I've just not done in this day all that I have to. So I'm really going back with that learning. That's really cool. So tell me more about what you did in London. I know that you were one of those students who got pulled into a lot of projects. And if I'm not mistaken, you were in about 7 or 9 films towards the end of your course. So tell me a little more about that. And let's also segue into how, when you came back, what made you choose Bombay? What is the work that you're doing right now? That's what I'd like to know.
So London was a very interesting experience, because the way my course was structured, it was really like work would happen in the industry. So we did have classes, but a lot of the learning was on set.
Okay.
Which meant that we got to be on some 20 to 30 sets in a span of 3 years, which is a lot.
Wow, that is a lot.
Yeah, that's not a number that you would get if you were just out working in the industry normally. So I got to be on a lot of sets. A lot of our education was through just working. And the diversity of sets that I got to be on, just in terms of the stories that we were making, the backgrounds that my cohort mates came from. We were from all sorts of countries. I was lucky enough to go to a film school where I think upwards of 80% of the student body is international.
Okay.
So we had people from all corners of the world. We got to hear all sorts of languages, interact with all kinds of people, listen to all kinds of stories, create all kinds of stories. Because one of my lecturers at film school would say, always make stories about the world you understand.
Oh, that's really powerful.
So he would often say, make stories in your mother tongue. Don't make them in English if English is not your first language, right? Or he would often joke about how, for those of us who didn't grow up in the UK, we don't know anything about Mr. and Mrs. Johnson or whoever, because we've never lived their lives.
True.
But do I know, being a young Indian woman, do I know about Indian families' lives? Yes, I grew up in an Indian family. And so those stories are far more authentic. I'd seen, because that was my community, my first interaction there was with Indian families who live in Britain. Their lives I was seeing their lives unfold as I was living in the UK. I understood their language, right? Long before I began to interact with local British families, it was the Indians in the UK that I interacted with, right? Their lives I knew, their stories I knew. So those stories I could write authentically because I was watching that happen in front of my eyes as I was going about my day. And he really got us into the habit of writing those stories and bringing those stories into the film school. So I got to work in a lot of, so I had a lot of, say, for example, Chinese friends
Okay.
in my cohort. So a lot of the stories of the Chinese immigrants in the UK, we made a lot of that. There were people from all parts of Europe. So their stories. And I think I was really lucky to get that exposure. So we did a lot of that, spent a lot of time on sets. And in our final year, which was really about working on each other's films, after classes were formally over, a lot of it was like the industry where people would ask you to be on their films if they trusted you to be in them. Right? So as a young filmmaker, I don't think anyone would ask somebody else to be in their crew unless they really trusted that person. So it was really about gaining the trust of the rest of the cohort, of the other people at film school. And I was very fortunate that I was asked by so many of my friends at film school to be a part of their crew. We ended up shooting all across Europe. So we made films in France, we made films in Italy, we shot one in Bangalore.
Oh, wow.
I shot my grad film in Bath.
In Bath.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful city.
It's a gorgeous city.
Yeah.
So we ended up shooting across the UK, across Europe, had a wonderful time. But yeah, it was really about building trust in oneself so that people from the cohort and other terms at film school could ask you to be on their crew. And I think that was a skill that I really acquired at that time. Make sure the people know that you're a dependable presence on set, that you're not going to let them down. And I think that's the skill that's held me in good stead, both in filmmaking and dance.
And that's the observation I was going to make, because you're making it seem so easy, you build trust and it just happens. But there's a lot of effort that goes into building trust. You're there when you're supposed to be there. You can be relied upon. You deliver what you say that you're going to deliver. And that's what you obviously did. Now, if that was such a great experience, what brought you back to India?
Home.
And why India? Oh, home. Okay.
Home.
Okay.
It's a very simple four-letter word. But also, I think I'd always known ever since I decided to become a filmmaker that I wanted to tell Indian stories. And I think at some level, there was a certain amount of fear, is perhaps a very strong word, but I was apprehensive of the fact that I would lose touch with the culture. I think it's very different making stories, observing a society, a culture, a people from the outside. And it's very different being a storyteller who's immersed in a culture. And I really didn't want to lose that touch. And I always knew I wanted to make Indian stories. And I knew that I had to be in India, especially with how rapidly the country is changing. I didn't want to feel out of touch with what was happening here. And there's so much, and I feel like there are so many stories to tell when a society or people are changing, shifting so rapidly. Flux always throws up stories. And I wanted to be a part of the flux that we're in today. And I use flux in a very positive way.
It's here to stay.
Yeah.
So you might as well look at it positively, right?
Yeah. So I really wanted to be immersed in this culture. So I felt like India was becoming a country that was beginning to tell her own stories, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Very interesting. While I'm listening to you speak, I'm just thinking of all the struggles that I went through as a young person. And I think you sound so much more sorted than what I was. I was pretty much out there trying to figure my way out. But this clarity that you have obviously comes from your family. And that's where you also have this love for geopolitics. Now, when I spoke to you, I couldn't figure out how dance and filmmaking and geopolitics comes together. So do you want to just tell me, how do they all meld together? What is the value of something like geopolitics in the movies you want to make and the dance that you want to dance? How does it fit in? Or does it need to fit in actually?
Yeah, that is perhaps a very important question. Does it really need to fit in? And I remember talking to someone who once said, well, I wish more people pushed themselves and moved out of their comfort zone. And I think just the act of moving out of your comfort zone and engaging in something that you don't engage in daily is just an important skill that you need even when you're creating art. Because that's something you need to motivate yourself to do on an everyday basis. Otherwise, you're going to stagnate even as an artist. So you constantly need to motivate yourself to move out of your comfort zone. And in a way, engaging in geopolitics can just be another way of doing that.
Sure.
But I also find that one really needs to engage in the wider world if one is to grow as an artist as well. You know, I've always believed, even when it comes to reading books, I always find that reading books about everything other than just filmmaking and dance adds to my filmmaking and dance as well.
That's what experience is about, right? It's like traveling or meeting new people.
But also my interest in geopolitics and geoeconomics is, like I said a while ago, by way of how cultural policy can be shaped. And that's a very recent interest. It was perhaps an interest that's been there, but I think it's something that I've been able to articulate quite recently. Is that cultural policy is something that shapes how countries interact with each other, which is, I think, why if you look at how the government is structured, the ICCR, which is a cultural body, falls under the Ministry of External Affairs and not the Ministry of Culture, because we recognize that cultural interactions between countries can shape relationships.
Absolutely.
And that's why you'll find that embassies and high commissions will often organize their own art festivals and film festivals in other countries.
It's a softer approach to building relationships.
Absolutely.
True that.
So yeah, so I think my most recent and most concrete interest in geopolitics and geoeconomics would be through
this
cultural policy, yeah.
You know, you were telling me that you had gone in for the Raisina dialogues. Not too many people may be aware of what it is. So tell us about it. Tell us how you became a part of it.
Sure. So Raisina Dialogue is a geopolitical conference that happens in Delhi every year. It's organized by the Observer Research Foundation, which is a think tank, and the Ministry of External Affairs. It's really one of the biggest conferences on global governance that happens in the world. It's become the ORF's flagship event. It's an event that's in the past brought a lot of very influential thought leaders, global leaders together. They're also very selective about who gets to attend. So they have believe they have upwards of 30,000 applications. They select a handful of them.
So when you say a handful, is it about 100, 200?
I think about 700 to 800 if I'm not wrong.
Okay.
I can't give you exact figures, but off the top of my head, those are the numbers.
Okay.
They're quite selective about who gets to attend, and it's a long process of selection. So I was lucky enough to attend it this year. I'd been wanting to attend for a long time. So even when I was in London, I would sort of keep my calendar free for the few days that it would happen, and I would make sure I watched it live on YouTube.
Okay.
So it's an event that I'd always been interested in.
Okay.
It's an event that many of my sort of intellectual heroes would attend. So I'd love listening to them speak, many of whom I got to meet this time. So I attended that this year, learned a lot, met a lot of people, learned a lot about how policy is framed, the conversations that take place behind policy framing, and actually really got to understand how beneath a lot of the socio-political conversations we have are the really more concrete, more nuanced conversations on how policy is framed. Because that's really getting down to the brass tacks. We often have conversations about socio-political issues, but when you're writing policy, when you're framing policy, that's really when you're getting down to the brass tacks, having nuanced conversations, really talking about data, interpreting data. That's a far more complex process than I think many of us realize when we discuss socio-political issues.
And I think when we discuss it at such a superficial level, and we discuss it without really data. These are all feels we have, right? Oh, I feel this way. But it's interesting when you say that policy gets written really on the basis of data. You've also been doing some amount of work, like you said, on making dance sustainable. And I do remember you saying that younger dancers are interacting with older dancers to see how is it that this can become beyond just the pain of an artist. You have to be a poor, struggling artist kind of situation. What have you done in that area?
So, I think a miserable artist is it's a popular image to the point where it's almost become funny.
That's true. I mean, if you're an artist, you have to be struggling and poor and, shivering in the cold kind of thing.
I mean, I think there's no smoke without fire. I do think that, I think it was Tom Hiddleston who said that when you're living life, live it fully, even the bad days, because you don't know what you might need to reach into to create your art. So I do think that feeling everything, both joy and pain, very deeply, is required for artists. And it's not something that always comes naturally. That's also an awareness that one needs to build through discipline. But I do think that you need a certain amount of security. I mean, you need a full belly to be able to create good art.
So where does that security come from?
Like you said, one needs to be able to earn enough to feed themselves and clothe themselves and have a roof over their head in order to be able to create good art. I mean, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You first need to look after food, shelter, just basic safety. Once your basic needs are taken care of, only then can you move up to the more sophisticated needs, I think, of good art, of self-actualization, of transcendence. So you do need that basic level of safety in your life in order to be able to create good art, which is why I think it's important that all artists, not just artists, but there's a lot of machinery, for the want of a better word, around art, right? So there are festival organizers, there are photographers, there are people who design light, there are people who take care of sound. They're all artists in their own way. And
True.
All of them, they might not be performing on stage, but all of them need to be taken care of. All of them need financial security because they're all working in the service of art and these beautiful Indian art traditions, art and craft traditions that we're all trying to serve. And so to have conversations around issues such as these, I organized a seminar. I started the seminar series. It's called Samanubhasana.
Okay. And what does that mean?
It's a Pali word.
Okay.
That simply means a conversation.
Okay.
But really it's referring to a conversation among friends. It's a conversation among people who are comfortable with each other, who feel safe with each other.
So it's not a debate, but a conversation.
No, it's a conversation.
Okay. Samanubhasana.
Samanubhasana.
Samanubhasana. Okay.
Yeah. And I started the seminar series back in 2019.
Okay.
It was attended by some of the leading art scholars, historians, dancers. And we had a very free and frank conversation about how to make performing arts financially sustainable, not just for those of us who perform on stage, but also those who work backstage, for how can a festival organizer get more funds so that they can then start paying dancers, because it's got to be a channel, right? Unless if the festival organizer is struggling to get funds, they're not going to be able to pay their performers. right? So it's about how we can sort of generate that channel of funds, how we can generate funds and pass it down to everyone and make sure that everyone has some money to look after themselves and to take care of themselves.
But it all rests on one thing, and that is, do you have an audience who wants to see this dance? Or do you have an audience who will want to see the kind of movies you will make? So I think it's also about being aware of that reality and perhaps then trying to get a younger generation more involved in the culture of India. I think there has been some kind of erosion, or I won't say erosion, I'll say what's happened is, and this is my opinion, please tell me if I've got it wrong. You're more of the generation that I'm trying to talk about. I think you're exposed to so many different cultures that the Indian culture that you represent in your dance and maybe in the style of movies you want to make, is that getting worn away?
That's a very fluid situation, I would say, because I do agree. Sometimes it can feel like young people are not very interested in their own culture. But I think the older I've grown, interestingly, the more young people I've found who are actually eager to engage with their art and craft traditions. And I think somewhere in this world where information overload is so much of a problem and we're exposed to so many different kinds of cultures, for a lot of young people, I think Indian art and culture helps them find their center of the table. And they will come back to it. Or they'll engage
I hope
in
so.
it in some way or the other to sort of center themselves. So I've known young people who have started practicing Western dance forms and an Indian dance form alongside it.
Okay.
Because they felt the need to do that. And then many of them have also eventually given up everything else and just practiced the Indian dance form. So
Understood.
there's a lot of young people who are very interested. And I do think that even in that way, there's a lot of cause for hope.
I hope so too, because I'm so passionate about all things Indian, right from the saris, the arts and crafts, the music, the dance forms. There's so much that there is to absorb in this country. In my conversation with you, what I'm getting to see of you is a person who very quietly, very unobtrusively is impacting the world around. I don't see you on top of a horse with, saying, yay, I'm going to rebel against the whole system. I see you as someone who is pushing, who's trying to influence, trying to impact. Is that true? Is that what you're trying to do?
I am trying to create an impact, I think, in whatever little way I can. But if in the future I feel like that will mean getting on horseback and riding down with a sword, that will happen too.
That'll happen too?
I just don't feel the need to do that yet.
Interesting. And I think what's really admirable is that while you're a dancer and you're a filmmaker, you're also looking at the ecosystem around and saying, how can I make it stronger? How can I make it bigger? How can I make it more supportive? And I think that's really cool because a lot of times, and I'm talking from my generational point of view, we become victims of the system. And either we are fighting against the system, which tires us out, or we are very, we're compliant and we say, okay, this is the system. What can we do? We have to live like this. But it's really interesting to see how you're understanding geopolitics better, to say, how will it impact policy? How will it impact cultural policy? How will it impact making performing arts sustainable? I see a lot of coherence in your actions. Even though when we started this conversation, I was like, what is this person doing? She's dancing, she's into geopolitics, she's into filmmaking, she does seminars. What is she doing? But I think I'm realizing now that it's all getting pulled so well together. I really, really have enjoyed speaking with you on this. There's so much to learn.
Thank you.
And that's really about bridging the gap, right?
Thank you. I think a lot of that also comes from my parents because they do that in their lives as well.
True that.
So I think really they've led by example.
Thank you. Been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
There we go, bridging the gap.